Arirang News. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and thank you for joining us. Today is the deadline for the joint security area on the border of the Korean Peninsula to be completely disarmed. After this week, this part of the demilitarized zone could truly become weapons-free, marking a new era for the inter-Korean ties, one where anyone could visit and freely cross over the border. We'll have more on that later on the show, but first, let's get the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jung-ho. We'll start with stocks this afternoon. South Korea's main index closed substantially lower on Thursday, and in midday trading hit its lowest level this year. The benchmark KOSPI closed at 2063, down more than 1.6%. In the morning, the index touched 2033, the first time it's gone below the 2040 level since January last year. Investors were spooked after stocks on Wall Street plunged on Wednesday across the board, some indexes wiping out all the gains they'd made this year. Analysts say investors are worried that disappointing corporate earnings for Q3 show America's trade war with China is finally affecting U.S. businesses. Preliminary estimates from the Bank of Korea show that in the third quarter of this year, the domestic economy grew more slowly than expected, mostly due to shrinking investment. Kaesong has the details.
South Korea's economy expanded 0.6% on quarter in the third quarter, on par with second quarter growth, contracting from a 1% expansion in the first. The Bank of Korea says compared to the same period last year, third quarter growth expanded by 2%, the slowest pace of growth in 9 years.
Exports and consumption led growth. Final consumption spending contributed 0.5 percentage points and exports 1.7 percentage points to GDP growth on quarter. But construction and facilities investments contribution to growth recorded a negative 1% and negative 0.4%.
Exports expanded by 3.9% in the July to September period thanks to semiconductor exports, while imports fell slightly due to a drop in machinery imports. Private consumption went up on growing purchases of non-durable goods like cosmetic goods and clothes. Government consumption rose 1.6% on higher spending in health insurance. But construction investment fell by 6.4%, mainly due to tighter housing market regulations, marking the sharpest fall since 1998. Facilities investment also dropped by around 5%. Gross domestic income edged up 0.2%, a turnaround from second quarter's negative 0.8%. The third quarter GDP growth data comes a week after the Bank of Korea lowered its growth forecast for this year by 0.2 of a percentage point to 2.7%. To achieve that target, the economy would have to post higher than 0.82% growth in the last quarter. Kaesong, Arirang News.
And we're now approaching the end of the National Assembly's annual audit of government ministries and state-funded agencies. Under the spotlight on Thursday is, once again, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, where rival parties are questioning the Moon administration's latest policies on job creation and its fuel tax reduction. Also ongoing, the audit of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office. Lawmakers are questioning prosecutors about their investigation into the latest abuse of power scandal in the judiciary. That involves a former top official affiliated with the Supreme Court who's accused of illicit lobbying and of using high-profile trials for political purposes. Other bodies under inspection today include the Office for Government Policy Coordination and the Prime Minister's Secretariat. Meanwhile, the National Defense Committee and the Culture and Sports Committee are carrying out on-site inspections of some regional departments. The government has unveiled a list of private preschools that have been engaged in financial irregularities, such as accounting fraud, following an audit after a lawmaker brought the issue to the surface earlier this month. After a public outcry, the government and the ruling party have laid out some measures to deal with the issue. Kim Min-ji reports.
Private preschools in South Korea will be slapped with hefty sanctions if they're involved in any irregularities and will be required to make their financial records transparent. It's part of measures unveiled on Thursday by the ruling Democratic Party and the Education Ministry in light of recent revelations of misconduct at some 1,900 kindergartens. A government audit showed that kindergarten principals had used preschool funds for personal expenses like insurance or phone bills and committed accounting fraud. Private kindergartens in the country receive government subsidies on top of tuition.
The government and the ruling party will deal sternly with irregularities at private kindergartens under a zero-tolerance policy. We'll also thoroughly monitor the situation so taxpayer money is used only for the children.
Private preschools will be required to adopt a state accounting system currently used at public schools known as EduFine. Although some have been reluctant because their financial records will be scrutinized, all preschools will be required to do so by 2020. The measures also include expanding enrollment at state-run preschools. The government plans to add 1,000 new classrooms next year, double what it had originally planned, while aiming to achieve its goal of an enrollment ratio of 40% at state-run facilities by 2021, a year earlier than targeted. The figure currently stands at 25%. The government also vowed stronger punishments if private preschools go on collective strikes or refuse to take new students.
We will take action against anything that infringes on children's right to education. The government will not just sit and watch children and parents being negatively affected by unilateral actions. After the Fair Trade Commission's probe, there will be strict punishment for those in violation of the law.
And to ensure that blame isn't put unfairly on kindergartens that play by the rules, the government will make their records public as well so the model cases eventually create a virtuous cycle. The government said this is just the beginning and more measures will be drawn up to address shortcomings along the way, and the ruling party vowed to do all it can to ensure backing from the legislature, whether that be by revising laws or boosting the budget. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. Not only that, young people these days are putting off marriage or not marrying at all. A group of experts at the direction of the presidential office has looked into the problem, and they find that it's not because young people don't want to get married and have kids, but because they don't feel they have the economic wherewithal to do it. Hong Yu has this story.
People in their 20s and 30s are giving up on marriage and childbirth, not because they don't want to get married, but because they cannot find a decent job. This diagnosis came from a group of experts formed by the Presidential Committee on Aging Society and Population Policy. Marriage and childbirth rates are closely linked, but to get married and make a family, people first need a job. The phenomenon of youth unemployment and way that employment has become a prerequisite for other things in life shows why young people see themselves as a generation that has to give up on things like dating, marriage, gaining work experience, and owning a house. Some people have expanded this list to include giving up on a social life and even giving up hope. According to Statistics Korea, the youth unemployment rate has increased to 11.3% in 2017, compared to just 7.4% in 2008. Experts say this is because it is difficult to find a decent job, meaning a job that provides a good income and a career path. Experts say that in order to solve the low birth rate problem, stable employment and residential environment must go hand in hand with improved childcare services and financial assistance for child education. They also advise increasing the level of subjective satisfaction by eliminating gender discrimination, such as women facing glass ceilings at work and having to take care of children without help from their partners, in order to overcome the world's longest hyper-low birth rate. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
In the latest development on lowering tensions on the Korean Peninsula, the two Koreas and the UN Command are close to completing the disarmament of the joint security area along the inter-Korean border. After the three parties conduct an on-site inspection, it's been said that the visitors will be able to freely cross the military demarcation line. Kan Young-woo reports.
People from the two Koreas will soon be able to cross the border at the joint security area for the first time in over 4 decades. The two Koreas and the UN Command are expected to finish the process of disarming the JSA in the demilitarized zone on Thursday. In accordance with the inter-Korean military agreement signed last month, the three sides will remove guard posts and firearms from the JSA, hoping to reduce tensions and prevent accidental clashes. Starting Friday, the two Koreas and the UN command will carry out a 2-day joint inspection to ensure the complete disarmament of the JSA. After a pilot period and more detailed measures to prevent defectors are implemented, not only Korean visitors, but also foreign tourists will be allowed to cross the military demarcation line between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. The two Koreas will station 35 soldiers, including 5 officers from each side for surveillance purposes, but they will only wear yellow armbands that read Panmunjom Civil Police, and they won't carry firearms. The South and North conducted a 20-day joint demining project at the JSA from October 1st. The two Koreas and the UN command verified the clearance of landmines on Monday at their second 3-way meeting. Since 2 American soldiers were killed by North Korean personnel in the JSA in 1976, crossing over the military demarcation line in the area had been strictly forbidden. 간영우, Arirang News.
For more, we have with us Dr Kim Choongsoo from the Korea Institute of Defense Analyses. Dr Kim, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
So, as we've just heard, today was the deadline for the two Koreas and the UN command to conclude the disarmament of the Joint Security Area, that's the JSA. Now, that's the area on the inter-Korean border where the two Koreas were able to interact and communicate, and literally where the security and soldiers stood face to face, standing guard on the border that separated the two Koreas. Now, the complete disarmament is still subject to a few more checks and over the next few days, but once it's concluded, it'll be a big change, the military relationship between the two Koreas. Can you explain to our viewers the significance of this change?
Yeah, it has a very important military significance, of course, but much more than as a political symbolism, because we are looking for the end to the hostile relation between the North Korea and South Korea. But now this is a very highly symbolic, and it's going to be a very good opportunity for the outside world, or the audience and domestic audience as well, that we are about to enter a new era of relationship that is no hostility against each other. One of the most important things is that if we completely demilitarize all JSA, beginning with this JSA, not talking about the whole MDL, because it's going to take many more months, but within this month, we complete the demilitarization of JSA. As a matter of fact, this has been not the first time. If you look at the 1994, I think it was November the 1st of 1994, when we were talking about the transfer of the JSA duties. It was transferred to the South Korea as a part of the OPCON transfer. To be more precise, it was armistice OPCON transfer. So we're talking about 10 most important duties transferred to the ROK side at the time. So that was a part of the JSA was controlled by South Korean military personnel only, excluding the US personnel. So this is another very important part. Now we are heading forward another transfer of wartime operation control, whether it be sometime like in 20 something. So as a step toward that direction, the denuclearization of the JSA, so that anybody can just travel to this area and they just cross the MDL, and they see this, sense all the freedom they can gain from this kind of free access to this particular area. So I think this is a very important significance to many South Koreans who are actually wanted to visit that place. But as a kind of concern is, if you look at in the past, there are many cases there were some South Koreans and North Korean defectors crossing the MDL. So some mentioned that how we're going to protect all these areas and how we're going to prevent this kind of risks, giving all these details in the Appendix 2 of the complete military agreement that has been signed recently. So this is before removing all these landmines and denuclearizing all the MDL. This JSA is a relatively small area, but has a very strong, high political symbolism as well. So that's why this, I think this is why the Blue House was so hurriedly, signed this document, even though there was a lot of opposition from the opposition party, because whether it's a party or agreement, but this is a very highly important agreement, And the first way to do that, implement that we really mean business when it comes to North Korea's denuclearization, because North Korea was asking for corresponding measures, not only from the United States, but from the South Korea as well. So if South Korea is ready to talk about the denuclearization, so what kind of response, what kind of measures are you going to take? So that way is we're going to demilitarize the JSA area so that many people just can visit there. And by doing that, we're going to move to the next steps of demilitarization of the two Koreas along the MDL, including, lands, eradicating all these landmines, sweeping all landmines, installing a new very safety zone along the way, also including the removing of the GPs along the MDL. So I think this is very highly symbolic, and many people just go there and can feel how much we have changed over the last 1 year. So that's why it is very important as a very initial step toward maybe a couple of time-consuming kind of efforts between the two Koreas.
So, as we said, it's a very symbolic move. South Koreans as well as foreign visitors will hopefully be able to come visit this JSA area and step over the line and step foot on North Korean soil if only briefly, and then come back. Of course, they won't be actually able to go into North Korea. And hopefully the presidential office have also said that it could happen before the end of the year as well. But along with that, though, are there any dangers, the fact that this border area is still meant to be a military border, is still meant to be a border that separates the two Koreas? The critics might say that this affects the defense and safetiness that this area provides. What would you say to this criticism?
Yeah, there might be some risk of personal safety that who want to enter this JS area, but I think before they I don't know whether they have to notify the intention to visit this part of the area. Maybe before that they would have to get the permission from the government. You don't have to get the permission from the JS, from the United States Command, because this agreement is made and there was previously there was a general level meeting between the ROC, North Korea and the United Nations Command. And I'm sure they were talking about the details, how they're going to guarantee security of all these visitors, potential visitors to this JSA area. So there must be some security measures already installed before allowing the visitors, South Koreans and the world from other countries to visit their place. So there must be a very detailed process to guarantee the security of any potential visitors to JSA.
Now let's move on to a different part of the border where there's been some controversial reports over the last couple of days. So there was a report that said North Korea had informed the South Korean authorities that they had lifted the freeze on assets at the Kaesong industrial complex. Now that's the complex that was shared between the two Koreas to have some economic interaction in the past as well. But that was of course halted in 2016 in February after tensions escalated after North Korea carried out nuclear tests and missile tests. The Unification Ministry and the Presidential Office in South Korea have denied that this has happened, but where there'd be some reason these kind of reports have come out, where do you think these kind of rumors and these reports have come from?
I don't have any information what exactly happened to this report, but there was some hopes that because South Korea went to better relations with North Korea, signing this kind of very military documents with North Korea, and that actually raised some hopes in the media as well, because we are talking about the demilitarization of JSL and MDA, also reopening of the Kaesong industrial complex again. As a matter of fact, there was a group of people, South Korean, small, medium businessmen who visited JSA area already, the Kaesong industrial complex as well. So apparently there were some reports that South Korea and North Korea is talking about the reopening of this kind of in the Kaesong industrial complex, and they are probably one of the most important steps for this. Is North Korea should defreeze all the assets they have frozen over the years. So that's why even though there was a kind of rejection or denial by the Blue House, there were some reports in South Korea that North Korea might have notified South Korean government of their intention to defreeze these assets because there's a first gesture toward the reactivating of the Kaesong industrial complex. I think that's why we have some reports saying that North Korea have finally agreed to denuclearize, defreeze all these assets, South Korean assets. But because the government has officially rejected it and denied it, so we have to wait and see. But there may be some kind of hopeful sign should come from North Korea, from Pyongyang. That's why people are beginning to just report that this is the next step North Korea should take as a response to South Korea's very warm, goodwill, measures that we have taken over the 7 weeks right now.
Of course, I'm sure North Korea would want this Kaesong industrial complex to be open because they are supposedly being very much suffering under these international sanctions that has been imposed on them.
Very true.
So let's move on to those sanctions actually. So these sanctions, of course, they hinge on the fact whether they can be lifted or not, hinges on the fact whether the North Korea and the US can make progress on talks towards a denuclearization. But now that seems it's been delayed until possibly next year. That's what the US Security Advisor John Bolton has said in reports over the last few days as well. If it gets delayed until next year, as John Bolton has suggested, who do you think gains from this situation? The US or North Korea? Are there gains and losses on both sides? Who do you think, which side will break first to make a move towards making concessions or making a move?
It's hard to predict who's going to break this deadlock first, US side or the Pyongyang side. But there are many reasons that the United States may take a kind of slow process, a slow step toward this important summit meeting between Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump. Not only that, Mr. Trump is very busy with so many other summit meetings, which, for example, he's scheduled to attend the meeting in Paris on November 11th, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the end of the World War II, together with Mr. Putin. So there are so many meetings we are not so concerned about. But for the U.S. leadership, there are many important meetings to attend in the years to come. So I think if you look at the Kaesong's very recent activity, that she was supposed to show up, but she didn't show up at the Vienna she was supposed to meet with Stephen Biegun, but she didn't show up. Maybe there must be some other reasons behind why she didn't show up this time. But some speculation goes on because North Koreans are trying to, again, is kind of their very traditional tactics of delaying so that they can get as much as possible from the US and South Korea. Nobody knows for sure, but we have to wait and see. But I think November and December is a very busy season for Mr. Trump, and so will be Mr. Moon as well, because at the end of the year we have so many things to pass and get legislated, so it is very difficult. But one thing I noticed is why Mr. Bolton said it'll be after the January 1st of 2019, because we understand in the previous years North Korea has already made a New Year's address on the first day of each year. So Mr. Kim Jong-un will make another very important New Year's address on the 11th, on the first day of January next year. So one of the byproduct of delaying this summit meeting with Mr. Kim is for the U.S. side, they're going to wait and see what kind of the speech is going to make in this very important meeting, if they really mean business, that they are really ready for denuclearization, and how quick they're going to accomplish implement all these denuclearization measures, because it will be a very detailed and difficult job for the North Korean leadership. And Mr. Bolton maybe wants to delay this until they get the real true intention and also the behavior so far to their particular point in January next year. So there are various reasons you can speculate on, but nobody knows sure. But one thing for sure is this meeting, which we actually expected to see by the end of this year, is remote. The chance of pre-remote, that is something we have to wait until next year. Again, going back to the Kaesong industrial complex, whether North Korea has really de-freeze all these South Korean assets or not, maybe it's something to do with the North Korean tactics, because they want to get as much concession from the South Korea and the United States. So that's why the Blue House was denied that kind of possibility. Even given all the givens that we are heading this direction, and we are expecting a lot from North Korea also shows some signs that even though they are willing to run the way of the denuclearization, but in that process, they're going to use South Korea and the United States for their own advantage. And if you look at the Chinese leadership and and the Russian leadership as well, they want to really intervene in this very important process of denuclearization and peace building on the Korean Peninsula. This is a very complicated international games, as a matter of fact. So that's why we have some reports contradicting each other. That really confused me, but I think we have to see, and we have to see what would be the real reality, because U.S. elections are coming pretty soon, and there will be a lot of important meetings, not only in South Korea, but also worldwide, China, Russia as well, and also for North Korean leadership as well. So that's why we have seen some kind of conflicting signs coming from each capital.
Of course, as you mentioned, going back, you said the January 1st New Year's Day address for North Korea is very important for their leadership. So we'll have to see what they say and what Kim Jong-un says in that New Year's Day speech. That's still a couple of months away. So hopefully after that, we'll also get your opinions on what they said there as well. We're out of time today, so that's where we'll wrap it up. Thank you for coming in, and it's always great to have you here on the show with us.
Okay, thank you much.
And that's where we will end it. Thank you for staying with us. I'll be back same time tomorrow. But in the meantime, hope you tune into our later newscasts for the latest from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
In a city where darkness falls and all are asleep, there is a dream that remains sleepless. I stood on the stage of dreams 10 years ago. I became very well known as a singer.